In the video. Okay, next item of business is report wolves management update. Who's going to do that? Larry Gilbertson or Rob?
I vote for Larry if that's okay with you. For the record, Rob Buonamici, Chief Game Warden. I'll preface all this with I am not an expert. Okay, so I'll tell you what I know, which isn't a lot, so it'll be short. But anyway, with regard to wolves, just they're federally, protected under the Endangered Species Act. So that's a very important underlying premise. And then with regards to state law, they were unprotected. We, about 2 years ago, did a regulation making them a game animal. So that part has been done, and it was done in part because we really didn't know where things were going to go with the feds with regards to wolves. Do we need to kind of set ourselves up if we need to do a wolf management plan or what have you? So that was all, those things were considered in that process. And we're just trying to be proactive, trying to set ourselves up for whichever way the wind ended up blowing, so to speak. And then currently, they're still federally protected, but then the question comes up, depredation. There's a wolf and it's eating somebody's livestock. What can be done? Well, under state law, you can legally protect your life or property, so you could take action and shoot, kill the wolf. So you'd be fine under state law. Federal law is a little different situation from the standpoint of they've got the jurisdiction, we're not in control there. Wildlife Services does have the ability to address those situations, but also, quite honestly, there's been some horror stories up in Idaho and some of the other states with regards to potential prosecution being pursued and so forth. So for me to sit here and give you a definitive answer of how that would play out in the federal system, I can't do that with any comfort, except that there are provisions with Wildlife Services to deal with depredating wolves. And again, with the state, we're okay, and then there's what they call a DPS, a distinct population segment. And what that basically is in a nutshell is a distinct population segment, a geographic area kind of on a map where recovery of the wolves to a viable population is the goal. Okay, Nevada is not in a DPS, nor is there any intent to put Nevada into a DPS. So what that also means is if you're in a DPS, like portions of Idaho and Wyoming are, and other states, if they have a wolf management plan and the population is such where hunting can be justified, hunting can occur. The state can regulate the hunting of wolves. But outside the DPS, that reverts back to the feds as far as jurisdiction with the wolves, ultimate jurisdiction. So we're not in a DPS. Okay. So we kind of looked at this and what do we really care about? One of the things we really care about is we have an unknown number of captive wolves and hybrid wolves in this state. And other states have the same type of situation. So these animals are being moved back and forth, sold, traded, bartered, what have you. Well, ultimately, what do we care about? We care that none of these hybrid wolves or purebred wolves in captivity are released into the wild in Nevada. I mean, that's something we can control or falls under our jurisdiction. So there, what we're proposing to do in the future is amend one of our NACs, 503140, that basically refers to wolves in it. But what we're looking at doing is adding a section that basically states, as used in this section, wolves includes a wolf or any subspecies or hybrid thereof. Wolf hybrid means a canid hybrid resulting from the mating of a wolf and a dog. Okay, so that being inserted into our current regulation makes it real clear to everybody, you're responsible for that. You cannot release it. If it is released or accidentally escapes, we have the authority to take action and take care of it. So that's kind of it in a oversimplistic nutshell. And if you ask me a very complicated question, you're probably gonna get a blank stare.
Commissioner.
Keep it simple.
Have there been any sightings of wolves? I think the last time we addressed this issue, there may have been one up around Jarbidge or somewhere in there.
We have had reported sightings, and I don't believe it. I believe we've had confirmed, but Larry might know that or not.
I might be able to comment. Last year, we got what I thought was a pretty credible report. The guys from Idaho that spent time in wolf country. They saw 3 quote-unquote wolves chasing elk, which is kind of credible to me. I was going to do that. We sent wildlife services. They spent time there. They could not determine if there were wolves or not. So nothing came back from them anyway that there was anything positive. That's what I know. Where you have anything?
Basically, I was in Elko for about 18 years, and I kept track of wolf reports, and I wrote down ones that sounded pretty good. The guy said he was from Alaska, said he knew wolves, had seen them before, that type of thing. Had 2 ranchers near Elk Mountain who've been living there their whole lives and were moving cattle, and they've killed a lot of coyotes, and I felt they knew what they were talking about. So I got about 15, roughly, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 that sounded pretty good. But we've never, between wildlife services and us, we spent a lot of time flying. None of us have ever seen one. We've never roadkilled, haven't found one dead anywhere, haven't documented one. And in comparison, since I was in Elko for those 18 years, we probably had about 5 or 6 moose sightings. And we documented a BLM biologist who was out hunting who got attacked by a moose. We subsequently found the carcass and the antlers of that moose. So with less sightings, we documented that moose existed. I had about the same number of bear sightings over the years. And in contrast to never documenting a wolf, one bear was killed at Taylor Canyon at a ranch, and another bear was trapped in Jarbidge and moved. So in comparison, I've got twice the number of wolf sightings, but we haven't documented an animal yet. But I will never say never. I suspect there could be some wolves that are coming down, making the loop. They're just not staying long enough to, I guess, to get killed, because we haven't documented one yet.
Commissioner McBeth?
What is the closest distinct population segment to Nevada? In other words, what is the proximity of the wolves to us?
Boise area.
Well, in Idaho, they do hunt wolves, and it's, I believe it's statewide where it's open, and it's a limited number of tags type deal, or once they reach a quota, they shut it down type situation. So they are documented in Idaho. How far down along the border, I don't know.
I could follow that up, only because Joe Bennett just told me. He's been talking with some biologists up in Idaho, and some of them indicate I think Joe said there are some wolves are being sighted almost regularly within about 75 miles, but there's kind of a big desert between where they're seeing them in Idaho and getting to us. But you know, it's not like a big population, but they're seeing wolves about that close. So.
Is that right? Go about 75.
Commissioner Rain?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Proposed timeline on this not legislation, but regulation?
It's basically drafted, and we could bring that forward at any given time.
Thank you.
I got a question for any biologist or the director. Does anyone know how many wolves per 1,000 elk it takes to have an impact on an elk herd? I've been doing a lot of reading, and it's in the literature. It's well documented that 4 to 5 wolves per 1,000 elk will have a serious impact on an elk population. And I'm going to report a little bit on Wyoming. And what they did there in Wyoming is the legislature divided northwest Wyoming, and they're classified as trophy. In the northwest part of Wyoming, they're classified as trophy game animals. And then in the other 80% of the state, they're predators. And in the trophy animals, you got to have a hunting license, everything in that part of the state in the northwestern. But in the remainder state, they're predators. There's no fees, no licenses. They're predators. You can shoot them on site, but it's managed by the Department of Agriculture. And the Fish and Game do not have the authority in 80% of the state. And they've got a lawsuit right now. They're suing the Fish and Wildlife Service because the Fish and Wildlife Service wants to turn everything, the whole state, into a trophy area so it can be controlled. And so they'll probably lose a lawsuit. But one of the things that are coming out of Wyoming, and I think sportsmen, and you know, it blows my mind and a lot of mine, sportsmen are not concerned about it, and the same in Wyoming. And they're losing hours and hours of hunter opportunity and dollars. On the east part of the park, they went to a limited quotas, and they've done that for 5 years. And the first time they've had to do that, if anyone remembers that, when the elk wander out of the park, you used to get on a list, and you could call it. These are trophy bulls that come out of the park in the winter, in December, and you get on a list, and they'd call you on a first come first served. And they've had to go to a limited quotas now, and 2 sections of the herd in the park, the calf recruitment is 9 calves per 100 cows, and that's non-existent. And those 2 sections, in the near future, the elk herds are going to disappear. And those used to be outstanding trophy elk areas, and they're just going to disappear because of the wolves. So, you know, and the whole herd only has 20 calves per 100 cows. That's statewide. But on these sections, they're going to lose sections of them. And so wolves are having a tremendous impact in these states, and we've got to stay on top of that, and we've got to keep sportsmen interested in that, because I think it's only a matter of time before, you know, something happens in Nevada. Maybe not. They're not going to show them in Clark County, I don't think, but they're gonna have an impact on ranching and elk. And after they're done with elk, they go to cows, you know. And I think we've got to keep on top of this, and the sportsmen have to keep on top of this, and you got to get educated what some of these other states are doing. And it's really getting to be a disaster in Wyoming, and we might have to go to the legislature to do something like they did, but that's just what's happening in the other state. And then in Idaho, when they get so many tags up there, but I was up hunting in Idaho, and they were taking a few wolves up there, but boy, they're hard to see. They're hard to hunt. They're easy to trap, but they're hard to hunt. And but this is a potential deal that we ought to stay on top of. And it's just like wolverines. They said there's no wolverines in California, yet they produced some pictures of them, you know, in the Truckee area. So we've got to stay on top because they're devastating. And I sent an email out to show them attacking some elk, and they do the same thing in cattle. It's just in packs. They're just ferocious, and potentially the problem could be in Nevada. We don't have it, but we gotta be prepared if it does happen in Nevada, and I hope we will be.
Mr. Chairman, there's at every WAPA and AQUA meeting, there's quite a bit of discussion about that. We've been, of course, watching that very, very closely. Wyoming chose not to go forward with the plan that Fish and Wildlife Service laid out for delisting. Montana, Idaho did, so they have hunting seasons. The problem that you have is that, and we talked to Ed Bangs about this, if they go after livestock, the 10J rule applies, and you can kill the offending animals. But if they get established, they start killing elk and wildlife, you don't have the ability to maintain that population. What worries me is that if we did get a population established, the only wolf death would be as a result of a landowner doing depredation. So, you know, what is the deal that I thought I cut with the Fish and Wildlife Service? We would develop a management plan with them that would say that wolves were extinct in Nevada. They were never established. If you go back to Fremont days, there really isn't any historical records that say that wolves had a population established here in Nevada. Given that if in fact someone did kill a wolf, that a plan would be put into place whereby no harm, no foul, basically, until it came back, yes, it was a wolf, and then we would have a management plan in place that Nevada would have control of its own destiny. And I thought that was going to go forward. That was the best we could do, quite frankly. Then the service calls and said, because of the delisting issues, the animal rights activists, and the lawsuits, they did not want to enter into an agreement with us because it was going to complicate what they thought of the delisting process. So we're kind of back to ground zero. I think we're in the same boat that Oregon is right now. Oregon has a pact that's been established that showed up. So it'll be interesting to watch how they evolve through their process and what control they're actually going to have. We don't want wolves in that. But the options for us that are available are pretty limited.
But the wolf problem in Idaho is Idaho's Waterloo. It is such a tremendous problem with the Department of Wildlife, with the sportsmen, the Idaho Fish and Game. It is a big. I mean, it's a big battle going on right now in Idaho. Tremendous battle. Anyone that's familiar with it, and it's their number one problem, and it just it's a huge problem in Idaho right now. And you know, you want to try to avoid some of this if you can. But anyway, that was my comments on the wolf problem. Anybody from the audience want to talk about it? Step on up.
Just follow on with the Paul Dixon, Clark County Cab, to follow on with the Rick Smith comment earlier today. I agree with you, Chairman Lent, on this. Actually, there was a PBS special that was on about Yellowstone in dealing with the Lamar River meadows during the winter time. And the wolves have been so effective at chasing the elk up into the tree line for protection that they're now impacting the bison herds. And so, you know, you get a pack of 4 to 6 wolves and they're taking down a ton sized bison and eating it. And they showed video of them chasing, you know, basically, you know, 7x7 bull elk, massive bull elk into the river. And the only thing that the bull elk could do was stand in the river until he succumbed to the river, float to the side, and then they'd eat him. They just sit in the side because if they came out, they just take them. So I mean, they are a real problem, and I think anything Director Mayer and Endow can do to try to figure out how to keep them from coming here is good. And I'll leave it there. But you are absolutely right. But there is actually a PBS special on that, on Yellowstone, that if people want to look it up, is very interesting to watch.
Somebody else. And hopefully the cabs keep advised of this too, and keep up to date, because that's, you know, that we all are in this together. Commissioner Cavan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken, how about Utah? Because my concern, of course, and I think everybody's, is that corner of Utah, Idaho. So does Utah have any wolves at this point? Or?
Sporadic. I talked to their director the other day, and enough sightings that the legislature did something that was the Fish and Wildlife Service just gave their heels. But they asked for a plan similar to what I asked for, and they were denied as well. So they're just kind of waiting for it to happen. It's kind of almost like a venereal disease.
No, you used to go out to get one of those. You don't wait for it to happen.
There's no protection for this one as far as I guess I was on camera. I mean, it's really a terrible situation. You can't really be proactive.
Well, because basically, when I was at Waffle, I talked to some of the guys about elk and wolves, and I said, you know, we're a little concerned about wolves coming to Nevada, and he said, well, do you have elk? And I said, yeah, we have elk, and you know, in the northeast corner, they're doing very well. And he said, just a matter of time, because 75 miles, you know, when they get run out of, you know, when a pack will run those young ones out, and they go establish somewhere. And 75 miles isn't much to a hungry animal.
Talking with
they can make it.
With a number of biologists, you know, kind of thinking through, well, why back in the 1800s, you know, there weren't wolves here. One of the things that we had going for us, we have mountain ranges, lots of desert between. Same thing that killed the travelers from east to west, you know, and that probably was an impediment to establishing any isolate like the rubies. It's not really big enough for a home range, and they're going to get into trouble. I mean, their appetite is such. So I think watching what happens in Oregon in the process, they're going to have to go through and give us a hint of what we possibly can do. I believe that we're on top of it. One thing I am worried about, wolf hybrids in southern Nevada. If they ever got away and got established, they would be instantly considered Mexican wolves. Then they will never be delisted. So we're interested in getting on top of this somehow.
Okay, let's go to the next item on the agenda. Bassett Cave and Comins Lake update. Mark Warren.
Chairman Lent, fellow commissioners, for the record, Mark Warren, Chief of Fisheries. We're going to get out of the game business for a minute and go to fish business. We're going to have a PowerPoint presentation by Chris Crookshanks, him and his lovely wife, Shalise, and their two kids live here in Ely. Chris is very passionate about his fisheries. I also fished Comins in the old days when the trout were big and the fishing was good, and I would like nothing more than to see it come back, so we're all working towards that. Chris?
That could be a clicker, yeah.
Okay.
I apologize, but this is really quick. We have
For the record, I'm Chris Crookshanks, fisheries biologist with the Department of Wildlife here in Ely. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today about some of our fisheries resources here in White Pine County. It was 2 years ago at a commission meeting, again here in Ely, where I gave a presentation on fisheries resources in White Pine County. Some of you folks were here for that presentation, some of you weren't. So I'd like to give you guys an update on what's happened since that time period. For those that weren't here for the previous presentation, I'll go through a little bit of a quick background first. So let's get started. We're going to start with Comins Lake. Comins Lake is located 7 miles south of Ely here. It was built in 1953 as a storage reservoir for irrigation on the adjacent 3C Ranch. It's 410 surface acres at capacity, has a max depth of 14 feet, average depth of 4 to 6 feet, and it's fed by Steptoe Creek, which flows down from the Shell Creeks to the east to Comins Lake. Northern pike were first introduced by the department in the years 1970 through 1973. We put them there to try to control a population of nuisance Utah chub, which essentially was the only thing in the reservoir prior to the pike. The pike reproduced like they do reproduce very well, and they ate like they do eat very well. After a number of years, northern pike being a top predator, they exhausted all food resources in the reservoir, including the Utah chub, the trout, and the bass in the reservoir, and the pike population crashed in the mid-1980s. After the pike population crashed, the Department of Wildlife performed a chemical eradication of the reservoir in 1989 to eradicate the species. The reservoir dried up the subsequent year in 1990. During this time period, it was owned by the 3C Ranch and used for irrigation. Water levels fluctuated wildly during drought periods. The ranch would take water down quite low in the reservoir. So we didn't see sufficient water levels to allow for trout stocking again until the fall of 1995. So beginning in the fall of 1995, we started stocking trout into Comins Lake again. In the fall of 1999, the reservoir and the 3C Ranch was purchased by the Department of Wildlife and was subsequently turned into the Steptoe Valley Wildlife Management Area. From the mid-1990s through the mid-2000s, Comins Lake was a blue ribbon trophy trout and bass fishery. In the year 2004, Comins Lake was the 4th most visited fishery in the entire state of Nevada. Put that in perspective, our little wet spot here in the desert was the 4th most visited fishery in the entire state, only behind Lake Mead, Lake Mojave, and the Truckee River. So there was more people that came to Comins in 04 than Pyramid, South Fork, Wild Horse, Tahoe, Lahontan. So it was a real spectacular fishery. Why? It's such a productive reservoir. It can just grow incredible fish, incredibly sized fish really, really quickly. It's got pretty much anything that a fish wants to eat in that water in copious amounts, and fish get really, really big really quick. Things were fine and dandy. We had a world-class trout and bass fishery until somebody illegally introduced northern pike into Comins Lake in 1999. That was our first report and first documentation of pike being in Comins Lake. They pulled off a real successful spawn in the year 2001, and subsequently they have spawned successfully in the reservoir every year since 2001. In recent years, we've documented extremely heavy predation on trout and bass. That's been going on since about 2002. In 2007, we made a decision to terminate all trout stocking at the reservoir because the trout that we were putting into Comins Lake were just getting immediately preyed upon by the northern pike, and we were losing essentially 100% of all the trout that we were stocking. Go ahead, one more, Mark.
Oh,
Yeah, one more. Oop, other arrow. Forward. Now forward once more.
Okay.
So essentially, since pike first started spawning in 2001, it took less than 10 years to transform the fishery at Comins Lake from this, and this.
It's one of our happier biologists.
One more forward. To this. Go ahead, Mark. Pike, it did not take them long, just like they did before. In the mid-1980s, they've essentially eaten themselves out of house and home. This is a fish that we captured during an electroshocking survey in the fall of 2008, and it was 42 inches and just over 30 pounds. Go ahead and go forward. So how does a fish that big get that way? If you look at this picture here, back one. You can see this is that pike that we were just holding. Front end is over here. Here's the pectoral fins. This is an egg skein full of neck springs eggs. This all white, opaque looking area is the stomach. And inside that stomach is a largemouth bass. And if you look at our fish measuring board here, it's not a small bass either. This bass was 14.5 inches and 2 pounds. So it shows you what the pike there are capable of doing, and what they do very well is eat other fish. Very interesting graph here. This shows you what has happened to the trout fishery at Comins Lake since pike were not only introduced but began spawning. You can see in 2003, even though they had spawned in 2001, those fish that had spawned weren't yet big enough to essentially be caught by anglers. So we didn't have any pike being caught by anglers in 03. They started being caught in 04, and subsequently you look at trout in 04 and our trout numbers start declining. And every year since, and the magical year was 2007, that you can see where the pike really took off and trout just drop off the radar through predation by northern pike. Current status of Comins Lake. Our shocking survey in the fall of 2008, we essentially documented the end of trout in the reservoir. Like I said before, we stopped stocking it in 2007. Since in 2008, we found 1 trout, and last year in our shocking survey, we found 2 trout. The 2 trout that we found this past fall were both brown trout that were about this big each. And there's a male and female, and they were paired up together because it was a fall survey, and so they were obviously of size too big for a pike to get their jaws around. The other trout that we found was a brown trout that was about 6 inches long, which was a fish that was washed down from Steptoe Creek. So by the fall of 2008, northern pike had effectively eliminated all trout in the reservoir. And this last year's shocking survey, we documented essentially the end of reproduction by largemouth bass. We still have bass in the reservoir, but each year when we perform an electroshocking survey of Comins Lake, you'd find adult bass, but you'd also find that year's crop of baby bass. This past year, that was gone. Pike have essentially eliminated reproduction. We documented no reproduction on largemouth bass, whereas at the same time, pike are still eating the adult bass that are there, as you can see by the 14-inch one. So essentially, like they did before, they've exhausted all the available food sources in the lake, and they've turned to cannibalism, which we've expected and which we sort of predicted what happened last time. Once they exhaust food resources in the reservoir, they eat each other, and you get a classic population crash. Recent data, length data on northern pike in Comins Lake is all pointing the direction that the population right now is in the midst of crashing. All angler reports and length data that we have on northern pike is that the average size is getting smaller and smaller and smaller fairly rapidly. Used to be, in the past few years, your average size would be 24 to 26 inches. It's like it's more 16 to 18 inches now, which is an indication that that population is crashing right now. As a matter of fact, I had a telephone call this morning from an angler who caught a pike at Comins Lake yesterday that was 46 inches, and it was just at 20 pounds. And you say, wow, that's a big fish, but that fish that we showed you earlier was 42 inches, and it was 30 pounds. And the angler even said, this fish is huge, but it's skinny, and he opened up its belly, and it was full of young pike. So, as I alluded to, the pike population is going after the only thing available to them, which is themselves. You can see this is a big pike here, and go ahead and go forward one more, Mark. You can see big pike here, and this is another pike in his belly. To put this in perspective, this pike that we pulled out of the belly of this other pike was 26 inches long. So it's not a juvenile by any means. It's kind of funny because, once again, these are fish from the 2008 survey. They're like the Russian stacking dolls. You open up one pike and you pull out another pike, and you open up this pike and you pull out more pike, and you open up those pike and you pull out baby bass. Go ahead. Very, very interesting slide here, a graph I put together, which shows angler use, annual angler use at Comins Lake. This is from our 10% angler questionnaire. You see at the bottom, this graph starts in 1996. Like I said earlier, after it was eradicated, we first stocked it again in the fall of 1995. So this starts in 1996. In 1996, there was 2,800 angler reported. Word really hadn't got out. Comins Lake was still sort of a secret. You can see 1997, there was 3,521 anglers. In 1997, secret hadn't really got out yet. Then in 1998, 8,323 anglers. And then from there on out, there was no secret on the fish that the reservoir produced. And you can see that angler use just exploded to well over 20,000 angler use days per year. Here's that magical year I was talking about earlier, 2004. We had 35,000 anglers fishing Comins Lake. And then you can see as the pike took over and they began preying upon trout and bass, you can see what angler use does. Dropped here, came up a tick, and ever since then is dropping dramatically. 2009, these figures just came in yesterday. We had 6,700 anglers fishing Comins Lake last year, which is the lowest number of anglers we've had at the reservoir since 1997. So in the presence of pike, we've come sort of almost full circle here, which is really sad.
Kind of looks like the housing market.
It does. Now I'd like to go in, talk for a couple minutes about our mercury situation at Comins Lake. 2006, just through routine testing that we do every year throughout all of our fisheries in Nevada, they get sampled for mercury. Routine sampling found elevated methyl mercury levels in the fish inhabiting Comins Lake. Northern pike had methyl mercury levels of 1.2 parts per million, bass at 1.25, and rainbow trout of 0.85. Again, this is in 2006. Subsequent to these findings, a health advisory was issued. 1 part per million is the threshold, whereas a health advisory for a fishery must be issued. So subsequent to these levels of mercury, we issued a health advisory recommending no consumption of pike or bass because they were both over 1 part per million of methyl mercury in their flesh. Okay, so we figured out we had fairly serious mercury problem in Comins Lake. Our next objective was trying to figure out, okay, where's this mercury coming from? So we got together with NDEP and the EPA. They did some soil sampling in 2007, and we identified 2 likely sources of mercury for Comins Lake. You can see Comins Lake here. Here's the highway. North is obviously up. Looks like the 2 sources of mercury are 2 historic mill sites associated with historic mining activities in the area. You had the Warden mining district and the Taylor mining district south of the reservoir. You have the historic Argus mill site, which is in the South Lake and the Comins Lake, right on the shoreline. There's also an additional mill site called the Monitor Mill, which is on Steptoe Creek, about a mile above the reservoir. And Steptoe Creek feeds Comins Lake. Go ahead, Mark. So after we identified soil sampling showed that those were two likely sources, the EPA and NDEP came back out in 2008 and conducted some sampling of the reservoir substrate to see if we could further identify where this mercury is coming from. In response to those tests in 2008, a real comprehensive one-year study was initiated, again by the EPA and NDEP. This study began last year. It's a one-year study, and it involves seasonal sampling, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And they're looking at everything. Soil, shallow substrate, deep substrate, vegetation, macroinvertebrates, phytoplankton, zooplankton, water, and fish, doing testing on all these variables. What the purpose of this one-year study is, we want to figure out where methylation of mercury is occurring in the reservoir. Methylation is, let me back up a second. Organisms don't uptake elemental mercury, the stuff that's in the thermometer. Elemental mercury is converted through a chemical process into methyl mercury. That is what organisms uptake. So bugs will uptake methyl mercury, fish eat bugs, fish eat other fish eat other fish, and methyl mercury bioaccumulates as it goes up through the food chain. That's exactly why the northern pike and the largemouth bass had higher levels of methyl mercury than the rainbow trout in the initial sampling, because they're predominantly piscivorous species. They eat other fish, whereas rainbow trout predominantly eat invertebrates. So comprehensive one-year study is currently underway. They've done 3 seasonal testings. They have one additional testing period to accomplish. That'll take place this August. Hopefully, what we're hoping to get from this is this study is going to tell us, number one, is methylation occurring at isolated localities in the reservoir, or is it occurring throughout the reservoir as a whole? From the results of the study, hopefully we can gain some knowledge and some insight in how to go about doing some remediation efforts of the mercury in the reservoir.
Is there federal funding for that? If we have to remediate, will it be part of federal funding?
The EPA and the NDEP folks say emphatically yes. So our next steps and future plans for the reservoir. Like I just said, the results from the study is hopefully going to direct mercury remediation measures at the reservoir. More than likely, it'll be most cost-effective and time-effective to conduct a chemical eradication with our remediation responsibilities at the reservoir. This will require draining the reservoir, more than likely draining the reservoir to conduct remediation activities, at the same time draining the reservoir down to as low of and pumping it to as low a point as possible, just as a cost savings. Rotenon's about $90 a gallon right now. You obviously don't want to treat 410 surface acre reservoir. If you can get it down to as little water as possible, it's gonna be a whole lot cheaper. So likely we'd hopefully do remediation and eradication at the same time. Go ahead, Mark. Talk just real quickly about Bassett Lake. Go ahead, Mark. It's located 5 miles northwest of McGill, 77 surface acres at capacity. It was constructed by Kennecott Copper when they were still here in White Pine County to serve as a desilting reservoir for their operations there in McGill. Max depth of 9 feet, average depth of 4 feet. It's very susceptible to low water and drought conditions. Bassett Lake currently contains northern pike, carp, and a few largemouth bass. Was once a very popular fishery, similar to what Comins was, and what Comins is what's happening right now. It represents a pike population after the crash. A bunch of real small, real skinny pike, and that's about it. Bassett Lake is important in that it is likely the source of the illegal introduction into Comins Lake. And it'd be most prudent to eradicate both Comins Lake and Bassett Lake simultaneously. If we eradicate one without the other, more than likely we're going to have pike show up in the other one. It'd be most prudent to eradicate both reservoirs together and hopefully get rid of northern pike from White Pine County altogether. Talk real quickly about Cave Lake. 14 miles southeast of Ely. Cave Lake was constructed in the 1930s. We purchased it in 1968. It's currently managed under a cooperative agreement with the Nevada Division of State Parks. They've done a real bang-up job at Cave Lake. Phenomenal day-use facilities, great camping facilities, fish cleaning station, hiking trails. They've got a enormous shindig going on this weekend. They're having bathtub races and a big, huge seafood cookout. It really is a jewel. It's 32 surface acres, max depth of 60 feet, average depth of about 25 feet, and it's fed by Cave Creek coming out of the Shell Creeks. It's currently managed as a put-and-take rainbow trout fishery. It also contains a wild population of brown trout. Current state record brown trout still is held by Cave Lake at 27 pounds, and it was caught in 1984. Averages more than 20,000 angler use days every year. In 2005, the department engineer did an inspection of the Cave Lake Dam, and it was found to be failing. So the dam at Cave Lake is sometime in the future scheduled for either replacement or repair. From what I understand, an RFP just went out to hire some folks to come take a look at Cave Lake, at the dam, and hopefully they're going to tell us, can it be repaired or will the entire dam need to be replaced? There's currently a study that's being conducted by the department at Cave Lake. We're looking into the feasibility of establishing an additional game fish species up there. It's my opinion at Cave Lake that it's got, like I said earlier, fantastic facilities. But fishing at Cave Lake, like I said, it's managed as a put-and-take rainbow trout fishery. There's essentially no growth on stocked rainbow trout. And therefore, fishing at Cave Lake seems to be a secondary activity that people do while they're there, while they're primarily there for camping or hiking or just having a picnic or whatnot. I'd like to turn Cave Lake, or fishing at Cave Lake, into a primary activity for people to come there to do rather than something secondarily. So we're currently in the middle of a 2-year study, assess habitat conditions, food resources, forage resources, water temperature, and hopefully look at establishing additional game fish species there. This is a shot of the Ely Rotary Club's ice fishing derby that they hold up at Cave Lake every winter. It's been going on for 10 years now. This was this year's, like I said. This year they had 590 applicants and well over 700 people on the ice. Reservoir gets turned into a little city. Rotary Club does a fantastic job with this event. They raise a ton of money every year for scholarships for local high school kids. But it's fairly amazing to see that many people on that reservoir. And that's all I got. So if anybody has any questions, I'd certainly welcome them.
Put a dollar impact on the loss of fishing resource.
I have not. There's been some local folks that have. Obviously, going from 35,000 angler use days a year to 6,000, it's a huge impact to the local economy. Gas, groceries, power bait, motels. There is one of our local realtors who did a study. Ely's economy sort of crashed when the mine first shut down. Subsequent to that, home prices in Ely and White Pine County went in the tank. This coincided with the popularity of Comins Lake when it was a blue ribbon trout fishery. What we saw was lots of folks from Clark County buying cabins and summer homes here in White Pine County. And our local realtor came up with an estimate that since the pike have taken over Comins Lake, it's been, just in the real estate market alone, it's been a $7 million hit.
The Fish and Wildlife Service does a study every couple of years to determine how much money people spend on outdoor recreational activities, and conservatively they estimate about $50 a day. They didn't interview me because it would be $200 a day, but at $50 a day, if you have 30,000 angler days, just as a rough estimate, minimum, it's about $1.5 million, you know, to the economy that was lost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things. One is, what additional species were you thinking about putting in Cave Lake?
We haven't decided yet. We're thinking about smallmouth bass. Cave Lake has got a really prolific crayfish population. It's got a lot of rocky substrate, which is ideal for spawning. So we're looking at smallmouth bass, but like I said, it's a 2-year study that won't be concluded till the end of this year. We're going to take a look at all the data and then go from there.
It's my understanding of the problems with eradicating the pike, probably the most challenging thing is going to be Duck Creek.
Yes.
How many miles? 20 miles? You got pike up Duck Creek?
It depends. It depends on the time of year. But Duck Creek, which is the outflow of Bassett Lake, which flows to the north in runoff period in springtime, it goes for 30+ miles.
It crosses a lot of private land, and so what's the solution for that?
We haven't come up with a solution yet, but we feel pretty confident that we can get them eradicated. We're currently looking at a lot of different options, thinking outside of the box on how to eradicate Duck Creek in that portion. But a lot of that will come with pre-treatment planning. And like I've told everybody before, you know, Comins Lake and Bassett Lake itself, Bassett Lake proper, will be relatively easy to eradicate. But Duck Creek, like you said, it'll be tricky. It'll be really tricky just because there's so much water down there, so many springs, so many, you know, channels down there, braided channels
everywhere. I think that'd be that's a job that'd be challenging.
Exactly. And another way to look at it is, say you don't get all the pike in the Duck Creek system north of Bassett Lake. You're certainly going to put a huge dent in them for a lot of years. Access there is really limited. It's someone's going to have to really, really want pike in Comins Lake or somewhere else to put forth the effort to go and get them, just because access is so difficult. Whereas with the previous, what's that?
Would they travel right into Bassett?
It would take a number of years.
So they're
Have you did a angler survey of what kind of fisheries they want there besides counting the fishery days there?
Nothing official. When I'm doing creel census activities, I ask anglers what they prefer, but overwhelmingly from, you know, our 10% angler questionnaire form has comments on it, and I was talking with the gals that input that data just yesterday. That's well over 90% of anglers want it returned to a trout and bass fishery.
It's no brainer then.
It's no brainer. It produces awesome fish.
Commissioner McGrath?
In a prior meeting, there was a discussion that another issue at Comins had something to do with the road as it comes across. There was an issue that you had to work out with the Department of Nevada Department of Transportation.
I think you're referring to the proposed dam expansion project at Comins Lake, which was sort of on the radar for a number of years. And as far as I know, maybe the director can speak a little bit more on it, but as far as I know, it sort of disappeared.
So there's no money. No money.
Yeah, last time, excuse me, Chris. Last I heard, it was had 3 proposals. I think 2 were 12 million and 1 was 14, and so everybody just, you know, no money.
Is that an absolute? Is that something that absolutely has to happen to be able to get Comins to come back?
Yeah, that's, you know, some people say it's unsafe because it's a highway and it's you know, waterlogged, so to speak, and would have to, you know, look at that when we did, you know, drain it and bring it back. But if nothing else, we're hoping that, you know, at least it can stay the way it is. without the pike.
Okay, and just finally, I can tell you that the people of this community would really, and I know you live here, so I'm probably preaching to the choir, but it's an incredibly important fishery, Comins, and it was a wonderful place. I caught my first, fly fish there, and so obviously I know you guys are working hard on it, but anyway, we would like to see it come back.
Commissioner Howell?
Did you ever have anybody going after them crayfish with nets up there at Cave Lake?
Oh, yeah.
It's
In fact, that one and the other one, been doing it all week.
All right.
They're tasty. They're really tasty.
Yeah.
In fact, we're heading up there camping this weekend, and we'll be doing a whole lot more of that.
Yeah. Oh, the pike.
Anybody from the public want to comment on this? If not, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.